Okay, I think we're going to get started. First of all, I just want to welcome and thank you all for coming to celebrate Marilyn's life today. It's really cool to see so many people. As you know, Marilyn passed away about 2 months ago, and you may wonder why we waited so long to come together and celebrate her life. And the primary reason is I really wanted this to be a celebration and not a funeral. And for me, at least, I felt if I waited 2 months, I'd be in a better position to kind of talk about her with smiles and not just sadness. And this is her birthday. So let me give you a quick overview of what we have planned today. It's not going to be a formal ceremony. It's going to be not too short, but not too long, maybe about an hour. Half of that time, sorry, is going to be me talking. Sharing pictures of Marilyn as I talk. I really want to apologize for talking so long. I really did try to shorten it, but there's a lot of things I want to share with you about Marilyn today. And also, as I was developing this and working on it, I came to think of it as kind of my gift to her. And I didn't want to scrimp on her gift. When I'm done, Marilyn's sister and several other people she was close to will talk. And then, most importantly, we're going to gather in the back for some food and drink so that we can share memories together. So I'm going to share some stories focusing on the things and the people Marilyn loved, because I think that's really a good way to gain insight into who she was. And then I'm going to close by explaining why I really think the woman I was married to for 33 years was a really special person. I want to begin, however, by sharing some memories of our very early days together. And the reason is they really illustrate the incredible patience she had with me from the very outset of our relationship. So these are some photographs from the summer right after we started dating. And the thing I remember about that summer is we just did a lot of outdoor activities together. I'll talk more how much Marilyn loved that kind of thing. Notice the hat she's wearing there. The hat is on this table, and we're going to talk a little bit more about the importance of that hat in a minute. So how did we meet? It was a blind date. So I had a friend at work whose wife made it her mission to be a matchmaker for me. So one day she was a nurse, and so she'd set me up with her nurse friends. And one day she handed me Marilyn's number and said she was expecting my call. So I just want to state the fact that things ever progressed past that first call was an early indication of her patience with me. But in my defense, okay, Jerry worked with a very wide age range of nurses. So I was a little nervous about what she had teed up for me. So not 2 minutes into the call, I blurted out, "How old are you?" And I don't recall exactly how the call ended, but somehow she agreed that we should meet in person. And we met in person a week or so later, and the exact date was March 11th, 1990. And I know this because that was the day my niece Alexandra, who's over there, was born. All right? And so as I was visiting the newborn and her mom and dad, I popped upstairs to the critical care unit because Jerry had told me that Marilyn was working that day. So I don't know if it's, well, actually, I don't know if it was because she was still irritated about the phone call, or maybe because I showed up completely unannounced into a very busy critical care unit, okay? I do remember she wasn't very friendly, okay? And it was a really short visit. But I persisted, and I called her the next day. I didn't ask any awkward questions, and she agreed to our first date. Now, this is not Marilyn, obviously, okay? But it's extremely relevant to our first date. So just bear with me. And it also really ties into this whole idea of how much patience she had with me. So about 3 months before I met Marilyn, I had just come back from living in Australia for 6 months. And this is obviously me in Australia. So you might say, well, what does this have to do with your first date? Did you fly her to Australia? No, I did not. I did one better. I invited her over to my bachelor pad and had her sit through a 2-hour slideshow of my trip to Australia. This is a picture from that slideshow. It gets better. Okay? That hat there, the reason it's there is, part of it is because she loved wearing that hat on our early hikes. But it's my hat, it's not her hat. It's called an akubra, and it's a special type of Australian hat that I had brought back with me. And the real reason that hat's on that table is because on that first date, I found it necessary to wear that hat during the entire 2-hour slideshow. It gets better, all right? I made dinner for her, and it was a steak dinner, okay? And not being much of a cook and being poor at the time, it was round steak, which is really not a prime cut, and I may have overcooked it a little bit. And a couple months later, she told me that she was, too polite to say anything at the time, but the steak was, and I quote, basically shoe leather, all right? So, given the initial phone call, the unannounced visit to the critical care unit, and the slideshow shoe leather dinner, you could argue that the first date should have been our last date, all right? But she had tremendous patience with me. But this doesn't mean that she ever let me forget about that first night. So I had to go to Australia often for work after we got married. And whenever I did, Marilyn brought up the slideshow debacle, and she said I owed her a trip to Australia. And about 15 years after the slideshow, I delivered. In fact, she got to go twice, once the two of us and once with the family. But because she got to go twice, I maintain that sitting through that slideshow was a very good long-term investment for her. Now, after that dubious start, I think that she probably enjoyed our dates a little bit more, but they typically involved outdoor activities, skiing and camping and hiking. Now, just like I know the exact date that we first met face-to-face, I also know the exact date that I proposed to her. It was February 15th, 1991. Now, the family is going to start moaning here because they've heard this story many, many times. They will tell you that I tend to repeat my stories, but none of you have heard this before. So I have fresh victims, all right? So I wanted to propose on Valentine's Day, but she had to work that night. So we went the next night to a place anybody from Seattle will know, a place called the Pink Door in Pike Place Market. And when the time came, I got in the middle of the restaurant, I got down on one knee, and I proposed to her, and she accepted. That much Marilyn and I agreed upon, okay? What happened afterward was always a subject of controversy and disagreement. The way I clearly remember it, very clearly, and the way I presented it to her and always recounted the story to her many, many times, was that after she accepted, what pandemonium broke out in the restaurant. First of all the other single women started wailing and pulling on their hair and gnashing their teeth when they realized I was no longer on the market. And then Marilyn swooned and fell out of her chair. Marilyn maintained that she did not remember it that way. But I always tell her, of course you don't, sweetie. When you swooned and fell out of your chair, you hit your head and you were knocked unconscious. Afterward, whenever we'd walk by the place with the kids, I'd always say, that's where Mom struck gold. And she would roll her eyes and shake her head. Again, I've told you, infinite patience, right? The Pink Door became a favorite place for us that we went back many, many, many times. This is us celebrating our anniversary a couple years ago, at which I presented her with a $5 plastic ring of the Space Needle. I found that ring in with her stuff a couple weeks ago. we continued to go back to the Pink Door. This is our last visit to the Pink Door on Madeline's birthday last February 2nd. Now, to get back to our early days, soon after the proposal, Marilyn decided that she wanted to make her own wedding dress. I tried to talk her out of this because I didn't think that was a great idea. But one defining characteristic of Marilyn was she was very stubborn, and once she set her mind on something, you're not going to change your mind. So this is her right after she started making the dress. She's all smiles here, about 6 months before, and maybe a couple months later. And the next photo I'm going to show you was taken in the back bedroom of her parents' house the night before the rehearsal dinner, as she was trying to finish the dress. Okay? Yes. I'm happy to report, though, that she did finish the dress and it turned out beautiful. Okay? And here she is on her honeymoon a week later celebrating striking gold. Although, as Merrick pointed out to me as I was showing him these photos last week, he said, "Dad, she was way out of your league." So I mentioned that I wanted to talk about the things Marilyn loved, and a really good way to start with this is animals. Marilyn, she just really loved being around animals. And our first family pet was the infamous Duchess, who many of you know. Okay, Duchess and I had a love-hate relationship, but Marilyn loved her. For a while, Marilyn and the kids fostered kittens, and they did that for a number of years. They just loved it. We probably had 30 or 40 kittens go through our house. It was just wonderful. And soon after she was diagnosed, Henry came into her life. Now, Henry was a real gift. Henry was a stray cat who pretty much just adopted us, and it happened right after she was diagnosed. So, you know, animals are pretty amazing, and even though, like most cats, Henry was really aloof, when Marilyn was hurting, like during chemotherapy, Henry just kind of snuggled with her. She kind of knew what was going on, which is just amazing, but anybody who's had a dog or a cat has seen this. Toothless then joined the family, and the two of them diligently protected Marilyn. But really the greatest animal gift to our family was Blue. Blue came to us about 2.5 years ago. And like Henry, Blue knew when Marilyn was hurting. And she just kind of covered her in love. This is how they were all the time when Marilyn was having trouble. Blue just threw herself on top of her. I really can't even imagine going through the last year, in particular, while Marilyn was kind of steadily declining without Blue. I mean, whenever Marilyn was hurting, Blue just brought her so much comfort and brought a smile to her face. Marilyn's wish was for Blue to be a therapy dog, and Merrick and I, we're going to do that. In addition to her own animals, Marilyn had a lifelong obsession with horses. We never had a horse, but she liked to ride them, but she liked just to hug them, right? And so here on the island, there's a animal rescue farm, and she volunteered there just so she could hug the horses, as far as I could tell. I should also note her love of wildlife. One of the things she loved about our house on the island, and the neighbors will know this, we have all these deer that come by the neighborhood all the time. She just loved when the deer, well, she yelled at the deer because they were eating her plants, but she just loved seeing the deer. And whenever we traveled, she loved going places where we could interact with wildlife. Right? She just loved being around animals. It was just the defining characteristic. But in addition to her love for animals, the thing that I remember most, and I think most people who are close to Marilyn remembers most, is that she was an incredibly active person. She couldn't sit still. Right? She always had to be doing something. And in the times during which she was healthy, it was usually something very athletic. And as I'll explain at the very end, these activities really say something about how Marilyn chose to live her life after she was diagnosed. So I want to quickly share with you some of her activities. I told you she liked hiking, with the infamous hat. We did a lot of hiking over the years, like most people who live in the Northwest. She also loved skiing, and she was a pretty good skier. She was a way better skier than me. So we did a lot of ski trips together, but she would never ski with me because she would just say, "You're too slow and stop too much." So I couldn't ski with her, but she skied with Merrick all the time. Another one of her great loves was snorkeling. We were lucky to be able to snorkel many, many places all over the world. And one of my fondest memories now is last December, our last vacation, just the two of us. We got up every morning at 6 a.m., we snorkeled, and then had a big breakfast together. And I just have really fond memories of that. One of the reasons she loved snorkeling was because she loved swimming. And after she was diagnosed, she decided that she wanted to do open water swimming. You'll notice Marilyn's wetsuit and a cap over here. She joined the Masters Swimming Club at the local gym, and she had a group of dear friends that she swam with at a lake in Sammamish, and 5 of them are here today. Raise your hands. These are the ladies of the lake, okay? They would swim mainly in Sammamish, but they had one very intrepid adventure off of Waikiki Beach, and so we're going to hear about that a little bit later. Another sport that she decided to take up after she was diagnosed was rowing, which is why it's very, very fitting that we're meeting here today. She rowed on Lake Sammamish, and just out of the blue, she decided she wanted to be a rower. She's the green in the top here. She also, and those of you who have lived nearby, she loved paddleboarding and kayaking. We did that for many, many years. But the activity that she really loved that wasn't athletic was gardening. So she was always in her garden. The picture on the right here is our house here on Bainbridge, for those of you who have never been to our house. What you're looking at there when we bought the house is mainly lawn. And so Marilyn decided that she wanted to rip out all the lawn. Actually, that she wanted me and Merrick to rip out all the lawn. But she planted all those, she designed the layout and planted all those plants. And she just loved being out in that yard. She was out there working all the time and bitching about the weeds, but she just loved her yard. She did have one weird gardening habit. Sometimes I would look for her at night and I couldn't find her. And eventually she would turn up. She was night gardening with a headlamp. So she did this all the time. And I'd say, "What the hell are you doing?" And then she'd mutter something about having not enough time during the day. And then she'd get irritated with me. So I just decided I didn't question her night gardening activities anymore after that. She also loved games, pickleball and cornhole in our yard. Blue likes pickleball too. But when the weather was bad, or when it was at night, or particularly when she wasn't feeling well, she really loved playing board games with her family. This game here was her favorite game. It's called Pandemic. Pandemic is a team game. Everybody wins or everybody loses. It's a really hard game. You lose more often than you win. And 2 nights before she died, she announced suddenly that she wanted to get up out of bed, get dressed, go in the living room and play Pandemic. And we did, and we won. Another activity that she took up with a vengeance, this was at Madeline's suggestion, was knitting. And she did this after she was diagnosed. So she had her own Etsy shop for a while, but mostly she just made things for various family and friends. Unfortunately, she decided to combine this knitting activity with another one of her favorite activities. And I tried to tell her this is an extremely dangerous activity and no sane person would do it. to no avail. This is knit hiking, okay? This involves knitting while hiking, okay? Again, I just went with it. I didn't question it. One final activity I have to mention is that Marilyn loved going to see live music. She loved going to see local performers, but she also liked to going to big concerts. And we went to a lot of concerts together. And one of my proudest achievements in our 35 years together was turning her into a fan of the greatest musician of the last 500 years, okay, who we saw many times together in concert. So beyond her love for animals and all her activities, the other thing you really have to understand about Marilyn is that she loved food. Now, she was a tiny little thing, so she wasn't a big eater. But she loved going out to dinner, and she loved trying new places and just tasting new things. Now, within the family, she was notorious for her sweet tooth. So she would always go for the icing on the cake. She'd eat the center of the cinnamon roll. The rest got thrown out. And then when she wasn't feeling well, particularly, I'd be sent out for a maple bar, and then she would eat the top and throw the rest away. She'd often hide her best treats because she claimed, without evidence, that otherwise I'd eat them all. Now, about a month ago, I found some Nutter Butters hidden in the back of one of the drawers of her desk. And I did eat them. But this sweet tooth is not why I wanted to mention her love of food. As I was sorting through these pictures, particularly those since she was diagnosed, many of the ones that jumped out at me were the ones when she was really enjoying food and drink. It's where I saw some of her biggest smiles. An important part of this, of course, is because she enjoyed the company of the people she was eating with. But I came to realize over the last 5 or 6 years that it was actually more than that. And I'll talk about this a little bit later, but even when Marilyn wasn't feeling well and she had no appetite, she would still want to eat just a little bit of something tasty. And when she did, she savored it. And it brought a smile to her face. And by the way, I want to mention to the family that despite her protestations to the contrary, I have photographic evidence that her love of food included my tuna noodle surprise. Okay? It's a fact, okay? Now, I've spoken of some of the things Marilyn loved, but I haven't spoken yet of the people that she loved and was close with. Marilyn had many dear friends, many of them who are here today, and she was close to her family. But several of her friends and her sister are going to talk after me, so I'll let them speak for themselves. But I do need to say a few words about two special people and her love for them. Although Marilyn was a wife and a daughter and a sister and an aunt and a friend, first and foremost, she was a mother. And our kids were a pride and joy. A couple weeks ago, when the three of us were having a hard time around Christmas, I mentioned to the kids how fortunate they were. Merrick protested, rightfully, and said, "I don't feel fortunate at all, Dad. What are you talking about?" But I reminded them they were fortunate because how close they were to their mom. And not all kids are that lucky. For both of them, their mom was their best friend. Merrick was fortunate enough to live next door to us for the last 5 years, and over the last year, they sat together for large parts of the day, talking or just keeping each other company while he worked and she played solitaire or trained blue. And Madeline called every night when she got back from her shift at the hospital, and they would just stay on for hours. Marilyn would help her study for various tests, and they would often, way too enthusiastically, discuss the gross details of operations Madeline was involved in that day. So yes, they understandably don't feel so now because they miss her so much, but they'll certainly come to realize how fortunate they were to have the relationship they did with their mom. And I know Marilyn realized that she had raised 2 children who were kind, compassionate, and incredibly resilient, and that brought a lot of joy to her. At the beginning of this talk, I told you I'd explain why I think Marilyn was special and extraordinary. And lots of people lead active lives, and they love their family and friends, and they're great parents. So that's not really what made her special. And of course, Marilyn wasn't perfect. I mean, none of us are. She wasn't always the smiling person that we've been seeing here. Like many people, she could be sad and withdrawn and irritable. And I know it's hard to believe, but sometimes she even got irritated with me. So to explain why I think Marilyn was extraordinary, I have to talk about something I haven't done yet. And that's, I need to talk about her illness. She would be upset about this, but because Marilyn rarely talked about her illness. And that's because she didn't want it to define her. And although it didn't define her, it certainly revealed something about her and who she was. And that's why I felt it was necessary to talk about it. Over the last 13 years, with exception maybe the last 8 months, if someone were to see Marilyn, they probably wouldn't know she had cancer. For long stretches when the cancer was slowed down or when she was in a remission, she just led an incredibly active life. Almost all of the pictures I showed you of her activities, almost all of them, were taken after she was diagnosed. In fact, I'm quite certain that Marilyn with cancer was more active than 90% of people who were perfectly healthy. She was just stubborn as hell, and she didn't want cancer to put limits on her. A great example of this happened a couple of years after her diagnosis, after she had weathered just a brutal round of chemotherapy. And as she was recovering, she suddenly announced that she was going to train and do a mini triathlon. And incredibly, that's what she did. Around the same time, she was involved with this place called Gilda's Club, named after Gilda Radner of Saturday Night Live. And she and the kids, Gilda Radner also died of ovarian cancer, by the way. She and the kids volunteered at the club to help other families dealing with cancer. And that year, the club sponsored a fashion show. And Marilyn took to the runway. She was pretty amazing. This is not a woman dying from cancer. It's a woman living with cancer. By the way, as part of this, she was invited onto a local TV show, The New Day. It's a morning TV show with some of the other women who were on the fashion show. And it was really fun. I got to sit in the studio audience and watch it. One of the other guests that day was the actor-singer Rick Springfield. So the older folks will know who Rick Springfield is. Young folks, you can Google him, but he was pretty hot, okay? And as we were driving home that day, I asked her, I said, which Rick is more handsome? I remember that she declined to answer. But for nearly 13 years, these good times were repeatedly punctuated by difficult times associated with treatments she had to endure to keep the cancer at bay. This included months of chemotherapy and hair loss and surgeries and multiple hospital stays, midnight trips to the ER, just lots of pain and discomfort for her, both physical and emotional. But what was remarkable is that through all these difficult times, Marilyn was incredibly resilient. And she faced everything she had to endure with courage and grace. Although she was often very frustrated about her illness because of how it limited what she could do, she never felt sorry for herself, and she never complained about how unfair it all was. And when she was feeling really sick, unless we asked, she typically didn't say anything at all because she just wanted to quietly fight through it on her own. And she kept a sense of humor about it all. The first time she lost her hair, which I think is this photo, when it started to grow back, it started with a long single strand right at the top of her head. And we named it Edith. And she loved that. And when her hair did all grow back, it was incredibly curly. The kids then named her Tifo, for the tiny fuzzy one. And she laughed at that too. And whenever she got bad news about the cancer recurring or a treatment no longer working, she didn't despair, she didn't lose hope, she didn't even cry. She just calmly and unemotionally accepted it and started working on what was next. Despite her small stature, the tiny fuzzy one she was just the strongest and bravest person I've ever known. As Merrick often told her, "Mom, you're my hero." So, how did she face her illness with such courage and grace? Well, a big part of it was that she had incredible resolve once she set her mind to something. And she'd resolved to spend as much time with her family as possible. But I think the main reason that she was able to face her illness in this way is that she decided to live very much in the present. When she was first diagnosed, we both got really into meditation. And early on, we went to meditation classes together, and we attended a long weekend meditation retreat. By the way, at a meditation retreat, you're not allowed to talk the whole time you're there. They're silent retreats. So obviously this was problematic for me, so we only did that once. But we still continued to meditate, okay? Meditation is all about teaching you to not to focus on the future or the past, but to be mindful of the present. And although she never talked about it specifically, it was clear that she took that lesson to heart. After she was diagnosed, she didn't feel sorry for herself and worry about what was going to happen next. She never did that. Instead, she doubled down on all those activities I showed you. And she even started new ones, like open water swimming and rowing and triathlons and knit hiking. And, earlier I actually alluded to how Marilyn chose to live her life after she was diagnosed when I spoke about how she always enjoyed and savored the food that she ate, even when she had no appetite. This, too, is really being mindful of the present. A favorite singer-songwriter of mine named Warren Zevon, he also died of cancer much too young, and David Letterman was a big fan of his. And Letterman had him on the show a couple months before he died. And Letterman asked him, what do you know now about life that perhaps I don't know? And Zevon looked at him very seriously and said, enjoy every sandwich. And that's what Marilyn did. Her idea of living in the present was often to be very spontaneous. I want to share one final story with you that really is a great example of this. 3 years ago or so, we decided to go out to Eastern Washington to see a hot air balloon festival. You show up really early in the morning while they're getting the balloons ready, and you watch them launch them. It's really, really cool. So we're wandering around, and somehow we got separated. And I couldn't find her, and I looked at my phone and said, well, she's standing right next to you, but she wasn't. And then I heard a shout from above, and I looked up. She had talked herself into one of the balloons. All right? Now, honestly, at first I was a little irritated, and I said, because I said, he doesn't know these people. That's going to crash, right? But then I looked up and I saw that look of joy on her face, and I said, this is just Marilyn living in the present, right? And it really made me happy. I talked about how close she was to Blue over the last 2.5 years, too. Now, of course, dogs live completely in the present. And maybe that's why they were so close. They both kind of lived their life the same way. And 1 year ago, I really thought that magically Marilyn and Blue were sending a message to me. I have this little calendar. It's a desk calendar. It's called Thoughts of Dog. It's got this little dog that looks just like Blue. And every day he shares a thought with you, right? And just after we learned that her cancer had spread on January 18th of last year, 1 year ago today, and her birthday, this was the entry for the day. This, of course, is exactly how Marilyn chose to live the last 13 years of her life. I taped it above my desk, and I try to follow that advice every day. In closing, I just want to say that people who sometimes speak about someone's legacy in terms of their personal accomplishments, but a person's legacy isn't measured by their personal accomplishments. It's measured by the things they accomplished. It's measured, of course, by whether they touched and made a difference in other people's lives. And how somebody makes a difference to you is a really personal thing. So I really can't say how Marilyn touched and affected anyone else. But I can say how she touched Madeline and Merrick and myself. She was a loving wife and mother who set an example for us by facing her illness fearlessly with resilience, resolve, and grace. And in doing so, she tried to show us, with Blue's help, that we shouldn't think too much about yesterday or tomorrow and should instead remember that today is happening now and it'd be foolish to miss it. And that's why I think Marilyn was extraordinary and special. And why I loved her and miss her so much. And to end on a happy note, this is Marilyn. Oh, I didn't know it was going to be. This is Marilyn 8 years ago today, on her birthday, celebrating crossing the equator on a small boat in the Galapagos Islands by dancing, oops, oh no, by dancing with the captain. Okay, our next speaker, I told you, I spent a lot of time talking about Marilyn and the things she loved, but other than Madeline and Merrick, I did not talk about the people she loved. So I decided it would be best to have those people speak for themselves. And the first of those people is Marilyn's sister, Denise. But let me get the slide back up here. There's a little. Give me a minute, okay? Because I think I turned it on. I could have done it right in the middle, and then that would have really been bad. Right? You can start talking. I'll get the slide up there.
Can I start talking?
Yeah, you're welcome.
Thanks. Well, thank you, Rick, for hosting this celebration of life and enabling us to collectively celebrate Mimi. So Rick asked me to speak on behalf of my siblings and to about Mimi's early years and to keep my remarks brief. It's cute that he thinks I'm going to follow instructions. Just kidding. Before I begin, I should mention that Mimi is the nickname that our family used. It stemmed from our late father's sense of humor and penchant for nicknames. He christened his 3 daughters, Dee Dee, Mimi, and Cece. Well, looking around, I know that Mimi would have loved this event. Being next to the water, seeing her friends and cousins, and enjoying the flowers, and drinking wine, and having dessert, and an excuse to dress up. Normally, Mimi and Cece and I would be trading texts and photos to help me decide what to wear to this event. And Isabel and Gilly and Maddie probably would have been roped into that decision as well. I think Mimi would have probably told me to wear a beret with this outfit, and sort of rocking Emily in Paris, perhaps. Because she always liked to have a bit of a flair when she dressed. If she was here, she would have already been sneaking some dessert. As Rick mentioned, she had an unparalleled sweet tooth. And if Mimi and Cece and I had been sitting together, I would have been quietly trash talking, perhaps about some of you, and trying to make my sisters laugh out loud. Cece was always easy. Mimi was a little bit harder to get to laugh. But I digress, and I'm on the clock. As I stand here today sharing memories of my sister, I am struck by the impossible task of capturing her essence in mere words. She was a force of nature, a whirlwind of determination, who lived life entirely on her own terms. How do you describe someone who could be fiercely competitive one moment and tenderly nurturing the next? Someone who could drive you crazy with her stubborn will, and yet make you laugh with her mischievous spirit. I'll do my best to paint a picture of the girl and the remarkable woman that we knew and loved. Mimi was one of 6 in our family, following Mike and me, ahead of Cece and Joe and Nick. Our parents, Marlene and Denny, loved having a big family. Mom loved kids, and Dad, we suspect, wanted enough kids to field teams for sports and games, and I do mean that quite literally. While Mimi grew up in a Catholic family in a small Oregon town during the 60s and 70s, she defied any stereotypes that you might associate with that upbringing. From her earliest days, she blazed her own path, unbound by traditions and expectations. Our childhood was filled with play and fights and work and adventure, and Mimi was always at the center of the action. As a middle child, she was anything but the quiet mediator. She was energetic, fearless, fiercely competitive. That's a theme. If we were playing cards or board games, she would do whatever it took to win. When it snowed, she'd be the first one outside, building forts and crafting the most formidable snowballs for their relentless attacks. Her competitive spirit was legendary in our family. Whether we were playing hide and seek, or jacks, or hopscotch, or kick the can, or playing with our cousins in sublimity, or any number of sports from baseball to kickball to tennis to skiing, Mimi approached everything as a competition, and she played to win, sometimes with what we'll call diplomatically creative interpretation of the rules. Family game nights often erupted with accusations of her and Cece creative scorekeeping at Pinochle, in particular. And they would just laugh and deny everything with that characteristic grin of Mimi's, the one that looked like she was about to devour something delicious. But Mimi wasn't just about competition. She had an incredible creative streak that manifested in everything she touched. She excelled at crafts of all kinds, knitting and sewing and designing. And as Rick noted, she even made her own wedding dress. When we built forts as kids, she always had the best designs. Her culinary skills were equally impressive, developing from her legendary sweet tooth that had her baking cookies and cakes from a young age. Growing up, Mimi was undeniably the most beautiful and stylish one in the family. She had a habit of borrowing my clothes, the bitch, without asking. And I will admit now, what I never could then, is that she usually wore them better. Her beauty was legendary, though she never seemed to dwell on it. Even when she became a high school cheerleader, it was just another challenge to conquer for her while she focused on sports and her future nursing career. Behind her beauty queen smile lay an iron will. And like our father, she was always busy and always focused on the next challenge, and her determination was truly formidable. One of the most enduring threads through Mimi's life was her love of animals, as Rick has mentioned. A trait I think she inherited from our mother. Our childhood home was a virtual menagerie. Dogs, cats, parakeets, baby chickens, pet rats, lizards, and even a monarch butterfly cocoons, actually a room full of them. Her nurturing instincts showed early, from helping friends with their horses to bringing home strays without warning. We remember when she brought home a cat in high school, just adopted it without asking. And in typical Mimi fashion, yes. It promptly had kittens. While our parents were less than thrilled, Mimi was overjoyed. And I think this may have been the beginning of her lifelong commitment to helping rescue animals. Looking back now, what stands out most about Mimi, I think, was her remarkable spirit. She was strong-willed yet nurturing, fiercely independent yet deeply connected to her family, persistent in the face of challenges, and resilient through life's ups and downs. She approached everything from childhood games to her greatest passions with unwavering determination and an open heart. In many ways, Mimi was a force of nature, wild, beautiful, and impossible to contain. She carved her own path through life, leaving an indelible mark on everyone fortunate enough to know her, and teaching us all something about living life on our own terms.
It's 2 minutes too long. Sorry. Thank you, Dee Dee. That was wonderful. Our next speaker is going to be Danielle Maletta. Danielle is a math teacher at Eastside Catholic, where the kids went to high school, and that's how we got to know them. I mentioned that Henry the cat was a gift that came into Marilyn's life right after she was diagnosed. But through Danielle and her husband, Orrin, we got an even bigger gift come into her life at about the same time. And that was the Malettas and their daughter, Harlan. But I'm going to let Danielle tell that story.
I'm already a wreck, so this is going to be lovely. This is Harlan, now 11. She came up here to support me. Hit the wrong passcode. Okay. Okay. Our family's introduction to the matriarch of the Cossack family began a little strangely. I had taught Maddie SAT classes at school. Incidentally, I first met Rick. I'll just add an aside here because I like opportunities to make fun of him. In, I don't know, 10 minutes of meeting Rick, I think he told me that he got a perfect SAT score. So, well, we were talking about Maddie's excellent performance. Yeah. All right. I'm sure Marilyn would appreciate me sharing that. So I taught Maddie SAT classes at school, and then later Merrick was a student at the same school. I was pregnant, and I think Merrick was a freshman. He stopped by my classroom. Fortunately, he grew into his ears. And he popped his head in and said, my mom said she could help you out with the baby when it comes. And I was like, okay. That's so nice, thank you. And in my head, I'm like, what? That's so weird. I had written it off a little bit, as a lot of people say that when you're pregnant, like, oh, we'll help you. Yeah, sure. Little did I know how sincere Marilyn's offer was and how strong her convictions were for the selfless care of others. Merrick returned to my classroom some weeks later and said, my mom is serious. She wants to help. And I was like, okay. A bit after that, Merrick brought Marilyn to my room after school one day. I've never seen such a bright smile. And her eyes sparkled when she earnestly said she really wanted to help. So I agreed. And as luck would have it, we needed someone to watch the baby on Fridays. Marilyn agreed, and here we are 11 years later. Marilyn's love for Harlan was like the unconditional love of a mother. She always saw the good in Harlan, gave Harlan constant attention, and played unending games of pretend with her, which I suck at. Marilyn would send me adorable pictures and videos of their time together while I was at work. It wasn't long until we were all made to feel like we were part of the family, going on various adventures and vacations together. I often sought Marilyn's advice with the challenges of raising Harlan, but you're great. Marilyn was so sincere in her listening. She always encouraged me and told me we had to do what feels right for our kiddo, regardless of what others said. She was a constant bright light for our family and for me. She fought through so much without ever letting anyone see her struggle. Even when she was going through different treatments, she would insist on still looking after Harlan. She even asked her medical team if the medication would prevent her from caring for Harlan. And if so, she didn't want to be on it. Marilyn would hide her hair loss and body pains from Harlan because she didn't want Harlan to worry. Harlan was and is the consummate caregiver, which I'm sure was modeled to her by Marilyn. Because I'm a bitch. Marilyn's fierceness with which she approached every day, unapologetically embracing every opportunity, as you've all heard, caring for others, quick with a hearty laugh and a sparkle in her eyes, and an honesty that always came from a place of love. Our family will be forever grateful for the amazing gift that Marilyn was and continues to be in our lives. Oh, sorry. Thanks.
Thank you, Danielle. So we spent nearly 27 years of our lives in Sammamish, and that's where we raised our kids. Marilyn has many friends in Sammamish, many of them here today. So I thought it's important that we hear from some of them. So next I'd like to introduce two of Marilyn's closest friends from our time in Sammamish, Lisa Auerbach and Bev McKenzie.
Have you ever had someone come into your life who you were convinced was a gift from heaven? For me, that was Marilyn. When we moved here from the East Coast, Lauren was almost 2, and I was pregnant with Robert, and we didn't know a soul. So I put up looking for playgroup flyers in the neighborhood, and actually I'm told there's an app for that now. Lo and behold, Marilyn is the one that called. Because, of course, Marilyn is going to see a flyer with somebody in need and called them. Complete stranger. This person calls. I answer the phone and just like, hi, I saw your flyer. And as it turns out, Madeline was 2, and Marilyn was pregnant with Robert. I'm sorry, Merrick. And I was like, seriously, could I ask for anything more? You know, custom order, Marilyn Kosick calls me at home. Well, needless to say, that phone call changed my life. Not only because I instantly became part of an amazing community of women, but I ended up with a lifelong friendship that encompassed far more than I ever imagined. There were breakfasts with Santa in Seattle, overnights in Seattle. There were times where we would go to see the gingerbread houses, and we would just book 2 rooms, and we brought the kids down and saw the gingerbreads, and then hung out at the pool in the hotel and let the kids like run rampant up and down the hallways, and it was great because Marilyn was always up for an adventure. And then there was family camp and dinner club and craft nights, with wine, of course, and sweets. And then there were the projects. As most of you know, Marilyn loved to keep busy. What a surprise. And we both loved home improvement projects. So between the two of us, there was always a garden or a house project that needed another set of eyes, or a bit of collaboration. And the projects often involved paint. And we were both very particular about our paint colors. It's so easy to just go into Benjamin Moore and find a color that matches, right? Yeah, no. We would sit there with our layers and layers of different paint chips and say, okay, well, these are kind of close, but not good enough. And so we both were very good at trying to mix our own colors. And clearly we needed another pair of eyes to help us with that, because supposing our color was a little bit off. So one of my best memories is when Marilyn wanted to paint her living room to match or complement the couch that they had gotten. And this was in the first Sammamish house. And so she bought a bunch of colors, and we're mixing and painting swatches on the walls. And we're looking and we're like, ooh, that one, that's the color. Great. Okay, how did we get there? Because it's not like we were, jotting things down or putting formulas together. We were just a little of this color, a little of that color, painting on the wall. And so after a lot of laughing and a lot more mixing, we ended up with the correct color. And thank goodness Benjamin Moore has color matching, because we never had a paint color that was that was store-bought. And, these are just the little things, it's those everyday things, projects, finding new restaurants to try. Marilyn was a foodie, and we would often get together as couples on a weekend, and there was always a new place that she wanted to try. So there was always fun with food and fun with making things and creating things, and just talking about everything and nothing. And I feel like these are the things that you take for granted. That there's all the time in the world, and that person's always going to be there. And you can pick up the phone after months of not talking to someone, and we would get on the phone, and 2 hours later we had caught up. Because once they moved to Bainbridge, it was more difficult for us to get together, but that connection never wavered. And these little things, the things that we take for granted, these are the things that I think I will miss the most.
So I met Marilyn, Maddie, and Merrick very soon after we arrived in Sammamish 26 years ago. Paige, Cameron, and I walked up the hill from our rental house, and Maddie and Merrick were playing on the front lawn, and they literally just ran over to us. We soon had some play dates scheduled, and Marilyn really helped me acclimate to the US way of life. She was one of my first friends here, and also a very big support during my divorce. She was always kind, compassionate, and resilient, the words Rick used, considerate and inclusive. She introduced us to sledding and cross-country skiing at Hayek, and that included hot cocoa in thermoses. We learned about s'mores, and that what we call vests were actually called undershirts, and your vests we call waistcoats. I can remember times Duchess escaped when the front door was opened, and Marilyn would drive around the neighborhood with defrosted chicken and the door open to entice her home. Cameron said that Merrick was one of his best childhood friends, and unfortunately he's still arriving from the ferry after his drive down from Bellingham. And he said the Cossack home was one of safety for him. We loved having the kids over to swim when we all moved to the Vintage neighborhood. I can remember many lazy summer afternoons spent in our backyards with water balloons and kiddie pools, and especially in the Vintage house with all the fruit trees. Halloween was one of Marilyn's favorite holidays, I've gathered due to the sweets, and we spent many of those trick-or-treating together. I remember her courage when she was first diagnosed and the fierce and brave battle she fought. I'm sorry that I didn't keep more in contact when the family moved to Bainbridge, but our phone calls did suffice. Marilyn was going into Seattle for regular treatments, and there are times when I wished I had come in and met her for lunch. She was certainly a valuable friend when I needed one, and I feel very graced to have been in friendship with Marilyn and the family. Thank you.
Our final speaker today is Teresa Matches. She is one of the ladies of the lake. So I mentioned to you that Marilyn took up open water swimming after she was diagnosed. And she had this wonderful group of ladies that she swam with. And again, mostly they swam in Sammamish, but they had quite an adventure off the beach there. So hopefully you can tell us about that one.
Thank you. Tricky. Shoot. Backwards. Sorry. Okay, can you hear me? Okay. I have a lot to say. I'll try and make it quick. Some people come into our lives and quickly go. You all have heard that before, and I'll come back to it. My name is Teresa Matches, and I'm a friend of Marilyn's from the Open Water Swim Group in Sammamish. that we coined ourselves the Ladies of the Lake, the Lalas for short. My life with Marilyn intersected in many ways, but the Lalas was the original one. Marilyn and I were swimming at one of the local clubs getting ready for an event, and we started chatting, and we realized that our children knew each other, and it was like, this is so weird. I actually have a friend who is mine that didn't start with our families, which is how it all was in the time when we were in Sammamish. Anyway, I digress. I chatted with the other swimming ladies with whom we're here today, some of whom are here today, and the ones that aren't are sending their love. They couldn't attend. But I asked them for their input for my remarks. Overriding emotions came through in addition to a variety of experiences that they shared with Marilyn. Her creativity, you guys have all talked about her art and sculpture and mosaics, her compassion, her ways that she was able to turn her illness into an advocacy for others, her empathy, her ability to be supportive to her family and to her friends, and her kindness toward people, animals, her ability to never meet a stranger or a pet that she didn't love, and her incredible strength, as evidenced by her athleticism and her versatility in response to any occasion, and her depth of character. She was one of those people who would just get right to it. You didn't have to, no pretense. And above all, her tenacity. Her ability to live with her illness and not allow it to define her was a model for us all. And I have a story to tell about that model. Regina, one of the Ladies of the Lake that's here with us today, and I had similar experiences learning about Marilyn's illness. Regina was swimming with Marilyn the first time and noticed her port, and she said, "Oh, you have a pacemaker." And talking about her illness and explaining her port and putting Regina at ease about her question all happened from Marilyn in the blink of an eye. I was having coffee with Marilyn, and we were talking about traveling, and she referenced, she wanted to stay close to home and she motioned to her chest, and I'm like, do you have a skin lesion? Do you have a heart disease? She had to show me her port for me to even know what she was talking about. Embarrassment was the least of the emotions that Regina and I were feeling about our faux pas. We had no idea that she was sick. Why would we? I mean, her diagnosis was not anything that was apparent in her busyness with us and her activities with all of us. She was swimming across Lake Washington. She was paddleboarding. She was running. I skied with her, and I know she skis fast, so faster than me too. The Lalas have shared tales of horseback riding, mountain adventures with her, Seattle art events, seeing swimming legends speak, attending mosaic classes, and doing group meditation sessions with some of our fellow swimmers. She was busy. She was busy all the time. Rick wanted me to tell you specifically about our Hawaii trip. I had done the swim in Hawaii a couple years before and was telling all the Lalas, we have to go. And so I conned 6 other ladies into coming with me for this trip. It's an example of Marilyn's tenacity and her allowing herself to be vulnerable all in one. A definition of vulnerability is allowing uncertainty. Well, that surely was present in our trip to Hawaii. There were 6 of us, as I mentioned. We traveled to Hawaii for a week to be tourists and to participate in an Ironman distance swim that's been happening since 1970. The day of the swim was beautiful, the water looked great, but you could not see the currents that were stronger than usual because of the 3 storms that had just been over the islands. I was swimming beside Marilyn, and about an hour and a half into the 2.4-mile swim, she asked me if we were halfway, and I checked our surroundings and let her know, no. We were only about a quarter of the way. We were just past the breakwater and just a little bit past the first buoy. There were a lot of support people there at the swim, which was great, and all you had to do was raise your hand if you needed help, and she said she was done. So she raised her hand, and the cute guys on the jet skis came and took her to the rescue boat, and that was part of the adventure all on its own. And I thought, okay, I'm going to put my head down and I'm going to finish, and I was right behind her. I raised my hand about 2 minutes later. Of 700 people that got in the water that day, there were 300 swimmers that were pulled, including the rest of the Lalas that came with us. So it wasn't just us. It was a stressful day. But now set the scene. Picture us. Here we are back at the beginning of the swim in downtown Honolulu with our goggles, our caps, and our swimsuits. No shoes, no cell phone, no way to get back to where we began. So I just looked around and went, okay, well, let's walk. So we started walking down the street in Honolulu, and we heard a horn toot. The woman that was our support person that didn't swim was driving by in our van with a whole bunch of other strangers because they also needed a ride. So she took us back to the beginning of the race, and we met up with the other swimmers that hadn't finished either. And that was the beginning of the rest of the adventure. We all were able to laugh and tell stories about wandering around Waikiki in our swimsuits. And for the rest of the week, we ate and hiked and were able to sightsee from one end of Honolulu or Oahu to the other. 7 women in 7 days, and we all survived. It was a great adventure. Back to my original comment. Some people. I didn't know that whole quote by Flavia Whedon until recently. It goes like this. Some people come into our lives and quickly go. Some people stay with us for a while. And move our souls to dance. They awaken in us a new understanding, leave footprints on our hearts, and we are never, ever the same. Everything, you have to be patient with me here.
Battery 100%. Connected to Teresa's iPhone.
This was Marilyn's anthem for our trip. I can't help but dance every time I hear it. We miss you, Marilyn.
Thank you. Thank you, Teresa. Sweetie, this concludes my slideshow. I think it's fitting that 35 years ago, we said hello with a slideshow, and today we say goodbye with one. At least this one wasn't 2 hours long. I didn't wear the hat, and the food in the back is going to be much better. Again, I want to thank you all for coming today. Please note the table over there. There's some index cards. I think we spread them around on the tables too. If you have some remembrances of Marilyn, if you could write them down and put them in the box, it would mean a lot to myself and the kids. You'll also find a basket of pocket hearts over on the table. A dear friend of ours, Renee Keene, she's holding her own special ceremony as we speak in Hawaii, her home island of Hawaii, which was held a very special significance to Marilyn too. She handmade these little glass hearts. Please take one. I really want to be able to thank each and every one of you in person for coming today. So please, let's convene in the back, enjoy some excellent food and drink, savor it like Marilyn would have, all right? And let's share some memories of Marilyn together. Thank you.